Hello everyone, this is POW Ponder on Weather. In this update, we're going to be talking about a big storm system with a series of snowstorms and then an Arctic blast by late next week. So if you're new to the channel, click the subscribe button and notification bell to get all my daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. This is your November 5th update. And what we're looking at here is the overall water vapor imagery this morning, as a lot of the country has dried out for a good chunk of the country. Out ahead of it, we've got that warm sector that we're going to be talking about with the developing low pressure system in the Gulf. That's going to be a big storm for portions of Florida and portions of the southeast, as it's a coastal hugger as it rides up the coast. A lot of the impacts are still in the Pacific Northwest with just rounds and rounds of precipitation this morning and into the weekend, and that's just going to continue all of next week. So let's delve into the details and look at the hazard map this morning. You can see we have gale warnings or continue to impact the coastal areas off the west coast here, with those just series of storms going to be impacting that area. We've got those frost and freeze warnings and advisories in place, with some frost showing up this morning in East Texas. That colder air continues to push as that cold front that clears out on the backside. You got radiational cooling, and that's where we're seeing a lot of the frost and freeze warnings this morning. And then out of the Gulf, we've got all those gale warnings in place of that developing low pressure system that we're going to be talking about. That's going to bring a lot of impacts to Florida and portions of the southeast as we move forward through the weekend. And it's going to be a coastal hugger with a lot of high winds in its wake. So let's take a look at this and kind of zoom in. And by the time we get into Saturday, starting in tonight and into early Saturday morning, we've got a formidable low pressure here at 995 millibar low pressure developing right here in the Gulf of Mexico. It's not going to be named a tropical storm or anything, but it's going to be packing tropical storm force winds in its wake with some very heavy rain, and it's a slow mover. So it's going to cause some flooding as well as it continues to impact central Florida and the panhandle of Florida. And this gets into southern Georgia and then southern South Carolina as we get into the overnight tonight, going into Saturday morning. And this crosses over Florida, but it's a coastal hugger, right? Hugging the coast, pumping those very high winds inland, and some very heavy rain into Georgia, into South Carolina, especially into North Carolina. It eventually gets into Virginia. This is, into tonight, into Saturday night, going into Sunday morning, because by the time we get into that Sunday morning time frame, this is November the 7th, Sunday morning, there's the low, still 1001 millibar right off the coast here, raking with a lot of impacts, a lot of high winds. We'll show you the winds here in a little bit, but yeah, some very heavy rain as this continues to hug the coast. And we're going to have coastal flood advisories are in place right now. And I think they just amplify as we get into the weekend. So this is going to be a pretty high impact event, but it's not going to be named any tropical storm or anything, but it's going to have basically the same impacts as a tropical storm would be from this system as it continues to ride up the coast. Now, the transition as we get into that Monday timeframe, November the 8th, I do feel it's going to, once it gets into North Carolina, a lot of the guidance is starting to come together that it's going to push further off to the east and miss a lot of the areas into New England. So I think it gets up into portions of Delaware, portions of southern Jersey, but I think that's where the impacts more or less stop for this particular system and moves safely offshore. So I'm not really expecting terribly too much impacts for New England for this particular event, but it's all going to be felt along the coastal areas into the southeast as we go through the weekend. So there's your winds. I mean, this is going to be a formidable event, guys, with some very heavy winds, packing tropical storm force winds for much of Florida, except it's the tip of southern Florida, but much of central Florida, much of the panhandle of Florida, much of Georgia, into the Carolinas, into Virginia, or North Carolina, into Virginia, and then even portions of Delaware are going to experience those tropical storm force wind gusts. And at times, they're going to be upwards to 60 miles an hour. And if you live right along the coastal areas, yeah, it's not out of the question. You could be seeing some hurricane force wind gust from this system. This is a Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, and then finally moving off by Monday morning. So it's going to be a high impact event for this weekend if you live along right along the southeast coast here. So let's take a look at the rain. So this is your rain between now, Friday, and Monday afternoon. So you can see a lot of the impacts are going to be right along the southeast coast for this particular low pressure system. There's the bullseye, goes into southern Jersey, but then it safely moves offshore. But yeah, some of these totals can be quite impressive. Easily a 2 to 4 inch swath, not out of the question. Some isolated amounts of 6 to 8 inches, and you could even get some isolated amounts of some 10-inch totals from this system, because it's going to be a pretty slow mover. It's not going to be a quick mover at all. It's going to be over a 2.5 day event as this continues to move across. But you can see in between systems for a good chunk of the country, you're clear. I mean, it rapidly clears, it warms up, you got south winds, and it's a very nice weekend ahead for a good chunk of the country as you're more or less in between systems. The only other action is right off the west coast with those series of storms coming in through the weekend for much of the Pacific Northwest. But then the transition starts next week as we get into that Tuesday time frame, because that's going to be our next system that's going to wreak havoc in parts of the U.S. So we've got another formidable storm developing off the Pacific Northwest. We've got, a 989 millibar, but this one actually deepens down to a 973 millibar with more heavy, higher winds along the coast. And this storm is going to be diving down into the northern parts as the jet stream starts to dip. So this storm is going to be the culprit of bringing more heavier rains off the Pacific Northwest and Northern California. And then once it gets into the interior regions, it's going to be able to drag down some colder air on the backside. And that's going to set up a series of snowstorms on the northern areas. But then a piece of the energy as the jet stream dips is going to dive southward and going to bring some more rain down into our southern areas that we'll get into. So because we take a look at out ahead of it, here's your anomalies, because it warms up as this cold front moves away, as this low moves away. We got warm air moving in on the backside. So a lot of the frost and freeze advisories right now are in place, but then once those move out, it rapidly warms up to the 50s, 60s, 70s, depending on where you live. But most of these anomalies are a good 10, 15, upwards to 20 degrees above average temperatures at times. This is all the way into Tuesday, right? As we're waiting for our next system that comes off the Pacific Northwest. So as we get into that Wednesday night time frame, you can see the jet stream really start to buckle, right? It creates that zonal flow to the north, brings that series of snowstorms well to the north, and then it buckles down to the south, brings pulses of energy, and it gets all the way down to portions of, say, Oklahoma. I think it really doesn't reach much of North Texas because the way the vorticities comes across. But as the system comes through, it's going to bring another round of showers and storms by the time we get into that Wednesday timeframe. So you're dry until then. So you're dry at least for the next 5 to 6 days. But yes, by the time we get into that Wednesday night timeframe, there's that other system going to be over your area and portions of, say, Oklahoma, getting into Missouri, into Arkansas by then as that jet stream starts to buckle. So look at the vorticity index, and you can almost see where the cold air is going to follow on the backside with this alignment here. Look at the isobars, they're really tightening up. So that's the gradient of the very high winds are coming back into play. So you're probably going to be in the dry side for much of Texas, but you're going to be impacted into Oklahoma and Arkansas, getting into Missouri. And then once this moves through, there's cold Arctic air on the backside that filters in as we get beyond Thursday, going into Friday, Saturday, into next weekend. So that we'll go over that here in a little bit. But there's the radar by the time we get into that Thursday, November the 11th time frame. There's the comma Q shape showing up. There's the 989 millibar low pressure, that rapidly deepening storm. We've got colder air filtering on the backside, bringing snow into the in places like Montana, going into North Dakota by then, as it bringing those colder anomalies down. You can see the blue lines. That's the indication of where that colder air is. The red lines, that's the indication where the warm sector is, right? As we've got where you are in the warm sector, that's going to be your storm. So we're probably going to have more storms breaking out into Oklahoma, getting into Arkansas, getting into Louisiana by then, as it tails another comma Q shape as it tails on the south side. So as we get into that Friday time frame, this just really starts to amplify, really starts to deepen. This low drops down to a 992 low pressure as it starts to pull in more Arctic air. There's a 1041 Arctic high pressure to the north, dragging down that Arctic air as the teleconnections start to go negative by then. So as they go negative, it's allowing that cold air to funnel and drop further and further south. And then it's going to be pulling, those winds going to be wrapping around. It's going to be pulling the air down further south as we get deeper into late next week. So you can definitely see the blues start to show up in Oklahoma and to Texas, with that Arctic air entrenching and back into the pattern as you rapidly warm up for the next 5 to 6 days. So it's going to warm up and then rapidly fall again on the backside. So as we move through, look at some of the temperature anomalies by the time we get into that Thursday night, Friday, right? So as that low pressure moves through on the backside, it pulls in that Arctic air, and then you start to see those temperature anomalies start to fall and start to amplify as we go through time. There's the setup by Saturday as this would continue to moving across. It's going to be another event for possibly the Northeast by then, as it rides up the Southeast coast, off the East coastline, going into Delaware, into Jersey, into New York City, going into Massachusetts, going into Boston area, riding up the coast of the I-95 corridor. There's the backside. So once that clears out again, it's going to be dry, but dry, and then pulling in that Arctic air. There's the 1030 Arctic high pressure, 1042 Arctic high pressure. That is definitely indicative of some pretty cold air mass. Some of these areas are probably going to be seeing your first freeze of the season coming up, say portions of Oklahoma, especially into Kansas by then, as that colder air will continue to push further and further south. There's more purples showing up by then. By the time we get into that Friday night, Saturday morning time frame, this is the November 13th, right? As that colder air pushes on the backside, and it pushes all the way down and gets into Texas, gets into portions of the Southeast again, but mainly the central part of the U.S. that I showed you the alignment. So a lot of the areas out west will miss out on this Arctic blast. A lot of the areas in, say, Arizona and New Mexico, for the most part, is going to miss out on much of this. And as this would continue shifting more or less into the central U.S. and then pushing off into the southeast as we go deeper into Sunday and then that mid-month time frame. But there's the setup by the time we get into Sunday. There's the next system with the low pressure going to be off the coast by then, off the East Coast, and then pulling down that Arctic air. But there's the warm sector, right? The warm sector follows on the backside from the west, and then the blues start showing up and pushes all this colder air by then all the way down into Louisiana, getting into Mississippi, for much of Arkansas, Missouri. This is probably going to definitely be your coldest air of the season. And then there's the really temperature anomalies by the time we get into Sunday morning. Yeah, all the way down into Texas, North Texas. You're probably going to be on the culprit of seeing your first freeze of the season, which would probably be about a week ahead of normal. Typically, it's about November 22nd in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that you see your first freeze. So it's going to be pretty close by then. We could see our first freeze of the season in portions of Dallas, but definitely Oklahoma for sure, and Kansas, and much of Arkansas is going to be freezing as well. So as we move through going into that mid-month time frame, this would continue. So we have warm air pushing back in from the west, pushing those colder anomalies, and this just shifts further east, and especially for the southeast, as we indicated, much of the below average temperature anomalies are going to be predominantly over the southeast and by November forecast. So I appreciate you watching. And here's the swath. Here's the wind swath, right? I mean, this is going to be a pretty formidable event with very high winds. There's the setup for the southeast this weekend. And then coming up with those series of storms and those pressure gradients and those isobars tighten it up, it's going to be packing some very high winds in its wake as it drags down that colder air. So you can definitely see the wind swath and where some of the higher winds are going to be setting up, mainly through the north. And as this jet stream starts to buckle, it'll bring some of those higher winds down further off to the south. And then there's the rain prospects for the next week as well. So all the coastal communities along the coast here, Northern California, unfortunately, again, Southern California misses out on a lot of this. Arizona, New Mexico, much of Texas, even much of Utah, and even portions of Colorado, right? I mean, as it pulls down in that colder air, a lot of this is going to be snow. But then once it picks up again, and then it more or less moves in, the jet stream aligns with more or less into, you know, Missouri, into Arkansas, into Oklahoma. This misses much of Texas. And then the comma storms tail off on the south side into Mississippi and Alabama, and then going into Tennessee, into Kentucky, going into Ohio Valley. And then once it gets off the coast again, yeah, you've got that southeast event, and then the one that's coming in next week for those the event for the northeast. There's the snow over the next 7 days as well, with those series of snow events on the backside as it pulls in. I do feel much of these areas are going to be seeing some snow into Idaho, into Montana, going into Colorado, Wyoming, getting into northern portions of Nebraska. As this continues to remain to the north, and it'll pull snow on the backside into the Dakotas. More snow for portions of Minnesota as well. You'll be seeing some snow, but it's mainly going to be to the north as the jet stream buckles and it pulls down that colder air on the backside as we get into late next week. So I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel to catch the latest update where I protect you before and after storm.